And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second episode of Not Your Normal Entertainment Review in association with 365 Broadcasting and your choice for getting the best reviews in the world of entertainment and social media. We're streaming from YouTube tonight, so if you have this app, feel free to listen in on the 365 Broadcasting page. If you haven't done so, please do us a solid and hit like and hit share and hit that follow button and bring your friends and family to tune in. This is not your normal entertainment review show. This is not any review page that keeps PC or tiptoes through the tulips to appease others. This is not some wishy-washy review channel. This is where entertainment and social media are put to the test. And we will spend this time we have together evaluating and discussing all elements of entertainment and social media. Books, movies, video games. They will be evaluated here. Audience feedback is essential, so please contribute. We are always on the lookout for new talent, whether it be political, sports, finances, advice, life skills, or hey, you're just somebody who likes to do podcasting on your spare time. If you know someone who wishes to contribute, send them over to our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/365 Broadcasting. Thank you again for contributing. Tonight, I have the honor and privilege of having a very special guest for this show tonight. I am currently in the middle of one of his books as we speak. Our special guest is none other than author Kevin J. Anderson. Mr. Anderson's first novel, Resurrection, Inc., was published in 1988 and nominated for a Bram Stoker Award for Best First Novel. He has gone on to write books to include the 14-volume series Young Jedi Knights from 1995 to 1998 and other Star Wars Expanded Universe novels. And to my surprise, little did I know, he also co-wrote with Dean Koontz on the Frankenstein series. But I invite him on here to mostly talk about his series of being a co-author with Brian Herbert, son of the late author Frank Hebert. They have collaborated to write prequels, and sequels to probably my all-time favorite science fiction story, Dune. Series of the struggle between warring houses and empires that fight and fall for the most precious substance in the known universe, the spice melange. Together, he and Brian Herbert have written 14 different novels on the Dune series, and I have not even scratched the surface yet. So without further ado, let's welcome Kevin J. Anderson. How are you doing this evening, sir?
I'm doing fine, Alex. Thanks for having me on. Your second guest. We'll try not to crash and burn your show. I'm glad to be on here.
Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. So how are you this evening?
I'm doing just fine. I've been writing a little bit and driving around today and doing some personal errands and then going back and killing off a dragon in one of the novels I'm working on. So it's just an average day. You know, that's for writers. We play with our imaginary friends and develop our worlds and make up stories and just do everything that we can to make lives miserable for the characters.
Well, we always like to go out and slay the dragon after all, so. But I do want to take this time to definitely thank you for this opportunity because I got to say this is definitely a privilege to have you on here.
Well, thanks, and congratulations on the new podcast. I hope it gathers dozens and dozens of followers or dozens of thousands of followers or whatever you're after.
We're definitely after anybody. So I've already given everybody a pretty brief background and history of the books you've written. Is there any other additional background you'd like to give before we get started?
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up as a fanboy. I've been reading science fiction since I could read, like 8 years old. I think H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds was one of the first real science fiction books I read. And I read Dune when I was 11 years old, and it just kind of blew my mind about how big and how great a science fiction novel could be. And then I read it again when I was in college, and it was like reading a whole different book because there's so many layers to that novel, and there's politics and religion and ecology and economics and all kinds of things that my 11-year-old self didn't read. I mean, I noticed the giant sandworms and the chase across the sands, but then I've read it. I have no idea how many times I've read it, a dozen or more. And each time I read Dune, it's like I get something different out of it because it's such a huge and complex book. And it's one of those books where it's like the real holy grail of science fiction, that everybody who likes science fiction really has to read Dune. It's like the Lord of the Rings in our genre, and it's just a wonderful landmark. And Frank himself wrote 5 sequels to Dune during his lifetime, and he had built many thousands of years of history that he expanded in his stories. And then he passed away from pancreatic cancer in sorry, I didn't look up the year, I think around 1986. And then a dozen or so years later, his son Brian and I picked up using his notes and started to flesh out other stories that he had sketched out, and we finished the grand finale of the big epic that he had outlined. So we're we're playing in the same sandbox, but getting lots more readers, lots of fans, and as we talked before the show went on, there's now going to be a pretty big resurgence with a new major feature film and a TV series and all kinds of stuff that I can't talk about in detail, but I'm sure your listeners have heard rumors.
Absolutely. But, the thing is, I think you really hit the nail on the head because, like, when it comes to science fiction stories, I think it's just like, it's the gold standard of science fiction because the thing is like, you've got the Star Wars, you've got the Star Trek, you've got all these other big genres out there, big name genres, and, no, not to really knock those ones, but it's just like, Dune is just like, it's just so massive, like, especially the universe that, that Frank Hebert started and that you and Brian Herbert have actually created. So, but anyway, I need to let the audience know, and you've already pretty much hit on that we are not going to be talking about the new Dune movie that is currently in post-production as of right now. But I'm pretty sure that, Mr. Anderson and I share the same sentiment on how excited we are for this movie. What do you say?
Well, I mean, like, as you hinted, because I'm working on it, we have all kinds of NDAs and I can't talk about it. But let's just say that I'm really, really excited. And after Peter Jackson did those wonderful movies of the Lord of the Rings, the original Lord of the Rings, or we're not going to talk about The Hobbit as we talked a little bit before, but the Lord of the Rings movies was just like this epic and ambitious and respectful adaptation of a great masterpiece. And I really think that Denis Villeneuve will bring to Dune what Peter Jackson did to Lord of the Rings. And I'm just really excited about finally Dune is getting the treatment that it should have.
Well, I think I couldn't agree more in that regard because, when I first watched the movie Arrival, I was like, this movie is incredible. Like, I didn't even know what I was going to be walking into when I watched it, but oh my God, was I sent on a fields trip that day for crying out loud. I mean, that movie gets me emotional every single time. But I really think that he'll capture it, especially with the fact that he's breaking it down into two movies. But anyway, I really cannot wait for it. So basically, my first question for you: how did you and Brian Herbert collaborate and write books like The Butlerian Jihad, The Machine Crusade, and The Battle of Corrin? How did you guys come up with that stuff?
Well, I mean, the impetus was after waiting for many years after Frank Herbert had passed away. I was waiting and waiting to find out how the story ended because Frank Herbert's last novel, Chapter House Dune, ends on a cliffhanger. It's all the characters are in this really terrible situation, and you never know what's going to happen, and it looks like the planet Dune is about to be destroyed. And then the book ends, and Frank Herbert passed away. And so, as a Dune fan, I was really waiting and waiting to see what happened, and I really desperately wanted to know. And I kept waiting for maybe Brian to pick up what his father had started, because the very last book that Frank Herbert published was called Man of Two Worlds, and that was a collaboration with Brian. So the two wrote together there, and Brian himself was a well-respected science fiction author with a bunch of titles that he had already published. But eventually, I contacted him through a mutual friend, and I sent him a letter talking about how much I loved the Dune universe, and not just Dune, but all of Frank Herbert's work, that I have read every single one of his novels because I just enjoyed Dune so much, and I took inspiration from Hellstrom's Hive and The White Plague and Whipping Star and the Dosadi Experiment and all these other books that Frank Herbert wrote. And after Brian received my letter, he, at some point later, called me up out of the blue, and we had never spoken before, but he called me up, and we just started talking about possible ideas, and my wife was in the room, and she listened, and she said, after about 30 seconds, you guys just started speaking a different language because we were finishing each other's sentences. We were riffing off of little obscure things in Frank Herbert's novel, The Eyes of Heisenberg, and stuff that just really, really, truly cemented the idea that we both were on the same wavelength, and we both really loved Dune, and we really wanted to see how the story ended. But at this point, it had been many years since Chapter House Dune was published, and frankly, people weren't going into the bookstore anymore to look for what the grand finale book Dune 7 was going to be. But we knew that there was such a huge audience of Dune readers out there, and I come into it with a huge audience of Star Wars readers, because I had written many copies, or many different Star Wars novels, so I had millions of copies sold in my own fan base. And so we decided what we wanted to do was write a story that everybody could read, not just the people that read through all 6 of Frank Herbert's Dune books. We wanted to get everybody reinterested in Dune and reading again. And so we chose to do a prequel instead of just the grand finale novel first. What we did was a trilogy that's the immediate, the previous generation to the novel Dune. So it's young Duke Leto and how he meets Lady Jessica and their initial battles with the Baron Harkonnen and how the Imperial planetologist gets dispatched to the planet Dune and the Emperor Shaddam and all this stuff that you read about in Dune, and they're all familiar characters, but you don't know their origin, you don't know their background. And so we plotted out that story, which was published as House Atreides, House Harkonnen, and House Corrino. And those were extremely successful. In fact, someone from the publisher said that they sold 3 times what the publisher projected they were going to sell. And,
oh wow,
that's what you want your publisher to tell you.
Oh yeah.
And then we had so much background to build up to tell the grand finale, because the grand finale just brings all these myriad story threads and thousands of years of history together. And so our next step was to do the real origin of everything. That's 10,000 years before Dune, and it's a series about the Butlerian Jihad, the original war against the thinking machines.
Oh yeah, we're going to get into that too.
Go ahead.
But before I actually get into talking about the Butlerian Jihad and things like that, I can't imagine, like, that must have been a dream come true to be collaborating with Brian Herbert to write these series, I bet.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was, again, Dune was my favorite science fiction novel that I had ever read, and I read it over and over again. And when I never got a chance to meet Frank Herbert because he passed away just before my first novel was published. And so I never got a chance to meet him, and this way I'm working with his son, and he's telling me many stories about growing up with Frank Herbert, so I've sort of gotten to know him secondhand. And then also looking through all of Frank Herbert's papers. He donated all of his papers to a university in California, and I got to go down and spend days in the archives looking through boxes of his correspondence and his early draft manuscripts, and then looking at his outlines and notes that Brian and I discovered, and we discovered 4 Frank Herbert novels that had never before been published, and
oh, wow.
the carbon copies of those. And my own publishing house, we released those as the cleverly titled 4 unpublished novels by Frank Herbert. They're kind of action adventure things. One is like survival in the Amazon jungle, and another one is about a missing writer in Mexico and how they're trying to find him after he's been kidnapped. And there's one that is a big science fiction dystopia. But just finding all of this work, and Frank Herbert wrote quite a lot, and he worked for newspapers, and so he's got file cabinets full of articles and short stories and things. So just I feel like I've really gotten to know him by spending so many years with Brian, just reading his letters and his notes and his outlines and his draft manuscripts and helping to bring some of them back into print. So everybody talks about Frank Herbert and Dune, but he wrote so many other great books that let's hope that this new giant resurgence in Dune helps some filmmakers maybe pick some of Frank Herbert's other books and go off with them.
Absolutely. So I know this is kind of a difficult question to ask, but so like out of all the series, which one would you say is like probably one of your favorite parts? Or like it could be a favorite book, it could be yours and Brian's, or it could be Frank Herbert's. I mean, if you had to choose just like one, which one would you actually say is like your favorite?
Well, I mean, the original novel Dune,
of course.
Down. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. I think it's the greatest science fiction book ever written. So let's just kind of put that one aside and take that one out. But of all the prequels and sequels that we've done, and of all the books that we've written, I have to say that Duke Leto is just my favorite character in the novel Dune. I just think he's the greatest hero, and he died to protect his family, but he's this tough leader, but his character, he's just the greatest character in Dune.
Yeah.
And so in the House Atreides trilogy, we spend so much time with the life story of Duke Leto. So that really resonated with me. But as far as doing just creating our own universe and our own stories. I really had a blast with the Butlerian Jihad books, which, again, they're 10,000 years before Dune, so it's the origin of everything and building up the entire empire of the thinking machines and the human resistance and getting the first Zensuni wanderers and stranding them on the planet Dune so they discover the sandworms and the spice. And all of that deep origin story is just really some of my favorite stuff in the Dune universe.
Absolutely. You know, I have to say that the first Dune book, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to get to the rest of Frank Herbert's books once I get all caught up again. I'm definitely going to listen to the first book again, but like, I have to go with you on like as far as like the war against the thinking machines, right? Because I got to tell you, that stuff was just absolutely crazy. Because like, I actually a while back on my other show, I did a segment about artificial intelligence and how dangerous it is. Actually, I even referenced the Butlerian Jihad in there. Because, like, you know, it's just, it seems very consistent in science fiction that when it comes down to artificial intelligence is that the created will always turn against the creators. So is that kind of where you and Brian got the inspiration when it came down to the thinking machine Omnius, which is the main antagonist in the war against the machines? Is that where you kind of drew the inspiration from?
Well, I mean, Frank Hebert set up the Butlerian Jihad, and he gave some of the background for the titanic war against the thinking machines and why in the Dune universe that there aren't robots and computers and all the stuff that's kind of standard with like Isaac Asimov science fiction or Star Trek science fiction or something. So he has an entire almost medieval empires in space is how Dune is set up. But we were looking at how the servant machines can turn against their masters, and that's a very common science fiction trope. But what do you do when you're on a galactic empire scale? And the Omnius, the computer overmind that they have, one of the really interesting things is because of the speed of light, you can't have a computer that expands across dozens of star systems because one thought would take decades to go from one place to the next. So we had to create a self-sustaining, like, multiple parallel copies of this evil, well, he doesn't think he's evil, but this evil computer overmind that's taking care of everything. But the one that we really enjoyed was the independent robot Erasmus, the one that sort of turns into he's almost like Pinocchio and Dr. Mengele put together. And then
what a thought.
Yeah, I mean, he's a robot that wants to understand humans, no matter how many of them he has to take apart so he can see how they tick, and he'll literally take them apart. It just, this naive coldness of this artificial intelligence that is embodied in Erasmus is one of our favorite things, and Brian and I both wrote that character because we just loved him so much. We would fight over, well, I'm writing that chapter, no, I'm writing that chapter, and of course we all edit each other's chapters as it comes through. But Erasmus was just one of our favorite characters, and then after the Butlerian Jihad trilogy, then we do another trilogy that's set about 80 years later as the formation of the Imperium and the Great Schools, and that starts out with Sisterhood of Dune and Mentats of Dune and Navigators of Dune. And in Sisterhood of Dune, there is also one of my absolute favorite villains is Manfred Tyrando. He's basically a anti-technology religious fanatic who just believes in what he's doing, and he is the scariest person that we've ever written, I think.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to. I've heard of him already, but I just haven't gotten to him yet. But like, you know, have you watched the Orville, the series?
Oh yes, we love the Orville. It's hilarious.
Erasmus reminds me of Ivan, like the robot. Isaac, yeah, that's who he reminds me of. Like when I picture Erasmus, that's who I picture as Isaac, because like that cold, calculating person, you know. And I love the Orville myself, but like
well, Isaac isn't exactly ripping people limb from limb, or at least not quite yet.
Yeah, not tossing babies off of the top of buildings and whatnot. So, but like one of the things like I actually like, you know, kind of like not necessarily talk about Dune, but do you really think that like when it comes down to artificial intelligence, do you really think that if like, because you know Elon Musk has had a say in this, thinking that we should be worried about artificial intelligence, do you think that we should be worried about artificial intelligence that has the capability to turn against us, the creator?
Well, and one of the people equivalent to Elon Musk that I personally work with, because I'm the publisher of his first novel, is Ray Kurzweil, who is also a big AI expert, and he was one of the guys who invented OCR technology and text scanning and text-to-voice recognition. And so a lot of times when you're speaking into your phone and dictating a text or something like that, that comes from some of the Ray Kurzweil stuff. And Ray is just incredibly optimistic. He says, no, we don't have to worry about that because we're going to create intelligent thinking machines, and they're not going to want, like, why would a machine want to overthrow its masters? And I'm intimidated by the possibilities because, I mean, right now, everything is so interconnected with AI. I mean, we're well past the point of Skynet as far as in the Terminator movies. One little thing that glitches could bring the stock market down, could bring our power grid down, could bring the internet down. We just have to hope that it doesn't happen. But one of the craziest things that I remember seeing was that they had created a self-learning artificial intelligence that they put in an isolated environment somewhere, and they made it learn about humanity only by reading Twitter, and the thing turned into this total maniacal psychopath in 4.3 nanoseconds just by reading Twitter. So, I'm not scared of it because I will say, Alexa, what's the weather tomorrow? And yep. I talk into my phone and find out I just said that to you, and now I've got Alexa talking to me on the other side of the room because she's asking what I'm really asking for. So, Alexa's listening to your podcast just so that you could be comforted there. I don't know that we can impute evil motives into artificial intelligence. What I am concerned is that we become so reliant on it that we don't know how to do anything ourselves.
Oh, God.
And,
yeah.
I mean, I used to spend all kinds of time studying my maps so I knew where I was driving to. Mm-hmm. And now I have no clue where I'm driving to. Yep. I just dictated on my phone saying, go to this address, and then I just blindly drive wherever it tells me.
Yeah.
And apparently there have been times where something's not set right, and it tells people to drive off a bridge and into the river or something like that.
Yeah, I definitely hear that. I mean, it's like we are so reliant upon technology nowadays. If you flip the switch right now, tomorrow, it would be absolute mass hysteria and whatnot. So,
right, but even step back from that, though, because when I was in high school and college was when everybody was starting to use calculators, and all the teachers were up in arms because, well, once we become reliant on calculators, nobody's going to know how to do math anymore. And they're kind of right. I mean, if they gave me a chalkboard and gave me a long division problem where I had to divide 283 into 68,471, I wouldn't have a clue how to do it.
Yeah.
I used to in third or fourth grade, but I don't know how to do that anymore. I can still add columns and numbers because I put myself through college as a waiter in restaurants, so I could skim down and add the bill all the time. But multiplying, division, that sort of thing, it's not a skill that I've needed to do. But on the other hand, I don't need to have the skill to use a card catalog in a big university library anymore. And that we used to be taught that. We used to spend all this time in these rooms. I hope some of your listeners remember this, like rooms with card catalogs where you would, if you were looking up computer technology, you'd have to find the cards about the computer technology, and you'd look up all the different books that you had the option of, and then you'd see the Dewey Decimal System, and you'd go wander off in the stacks and try to find that book. And nobody does that anymore. You type it into Google, and it gives you various answers.
Yeah.
Which, in a way, it's way more convenient. I'm glad I don't spend the afternoon looking up Napoleon's birthday when I can just
Google.
In fact, I can ask I won't say her name again because she's going to answer it. And Alexa, what is Napoleon's birthday?
I think I just heard her in the background.
She's answering there. Not that any of you cares about what Napoleon's birthday is, but I mean, so the ways that AI is improving our lives is just astounding.
Yeah.
But there's that one thing that could go wrong. I mean, what if somebody makes a little mistake and it brings down our entire power grid? Well, that wouldn't be good. That kind of would make up for all the convenience that it gave us. But but I'm not a paranoid anti-technology guy. I think technology is a good thing, and it has helped. But it may not be nice to have some checks and balances here.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more there, because like that's the most important thing, because if you just rely entirely on the technology and still can't like think for yourself, and just like in the Dune series, that's why they came up with the Mentets, the human computers, the ability to compute and just be able to just be subject matter experts in their field, and just to memorize and just do calculations within their head. I mean, that's why they came up with them, to kind of get away with it. Now, I'm not saying we go that route, but that's the main reason I came up with it, because we were so heavily reliant on computer technology and AI to solve all of our problems for us. And then, like, once the battle against the machines came up, I mean, they were still actually using them until, like, the end of the Battle of Corrin. Then all that technology was outlawed, and then people had to kind of, think for themselves again, all over again, which wouldn't be the end of the world. But it's just like, right now, if you were to pull the plug tomorrow, I mean, it would just be mass hysteria. Like, the entire markets would collapse. Food out in the fields would completely rot. But, we're kind of getting away from what we're supposed to be talking about right now. But the thing is, we're actually at the top of the hour. We're just going to take like a 3-minute break real quick, and we're just do a quick commercial. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you need to take the time to go use the bathroom, top off your beverage, please do so at this time, and we will be back in about 3.5 minutes. See you in a minute, Kevin.
Okay.
Walter Cronkite said, in seeking the truth, you have to get both sides of the story. Coming to you live from the impact area of information and the destination of deliberate discussion. Welcome to Depth of Perspective, where the truth has no bias. With your host, Alex Kirsch. Information is our weapon, and we aim it on the azimuth of fire towards a better future for our country. Prepare yourselves for the arrival.
Unleashed Nation, 5 p.m. Eastern. See you there.
Tune in each weeknight for a unique point of view that's unapologetically politically incorrect. Because life isn't about left or right, it's about right and wrong. The Jack Alexander Experiment streams live Monday to Friday nights from 7 p.m. Eastern on Facebook and YouTube. Can't get enough? Check out the Jack Alexander Experiment podcast wherever good podcasts can be found.
Did you know that 22 veterans a day take their own life? Did you know that 40 million people suffer from anxiety in the U.S.? I refuse to stand back. I believe that some of our biggest challenges as humans are internal. Anxiety, depression, PTSD. Join myself, Zach K., every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern on the Cerebral Connection.
And welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everybody had a good chance to get a good break in, and hopefully everybody is ready for the next half hour right here. So anyway, my next question, Kevin, you ready to go this?
I'm ready. I've had an entire sip of water, so I'm ready to go.
Fantastic.
And when you're talking about Dune, having a sip of water, that's a valuable thing. So let's tie it together there.
Water is life.
Yes. All right, what's your question?
So my next question, when it comes down to these novels, I honestly think that you and Brian Herbert did a fantastic job and did a thorough, backstory on the series and whatnot, especially when it comes to the machines that are programmed to enslave or exterminate mankind, right? And how humanity has to fight this enemy. Yet, for some reason in these stories, right, they were doing humankind was doing the same thing to their own people. We're talking about the Zen Sunni and the Zen Shia, the Buddha Islamists. They were used as slave labor. So you kind of have to ask yourself, they say that the machines were the bad guys, but yet we did the exact same thing. So who are the real bad guys here?
Well, you really put your finger on it. That's one of the things that we are trying to do, not just in the Dune books, but Brian and I wrote an original trilogy, the Hellhole trilogy, where that also comes about. And in this big fantasy series I'm doing right now, that's kind of a core message that appears again and again, is that you may have aliens attacking or giant dragons or thinking machines or obvious enemies, but human beings are really, really good at hurting each other too. And we're also very good at finding scapegoats and picking on, maybe shooting the wrong target, I guess we'll put it that way. And that is one of the themes that we're trying to do in the whole Butlerian Jihad thing, is that humans have to stand together to defeat the thinking machines. At the same time, there are humans with self-interest, there are humans that may be twisted, there are humans who don't see other humans as human beings, that we reflect the worst in the people that or in the enemies that we are trying to defeat. And that's sort of a commentary on human nature that we have, that for every big thinking machine that you can fight, there's also some jerk who's trying to profit off of something that is going to cause thousands of people to die by skimming off a vaccine or something like that. And that's our human history. You can look back. It's not a fictional thing that we made up. So that's one of the things that we look at, is that human versus human is one of the greatest conflicts, because we cause our own problems. Let me put it that way.
Sure, absolutely. And that was actually a really interesting concept, because when it came down to the Machine Crusade, right? One of the characters who was originally a slave, Iblis Gimjo, in the Butlerian Jihad, and then when he actually was able to escape with Vorian Atreides and Serena Butler, and then come to find out, he became the very thing he was fighting against. And the thing is, the person that found this out was, Xavier Harkonnen. Now, I love the fact that you guys actually made, the Harkonnens originally the good guys, and it was the Atreides that was the bad guy. But that's only because he didn't know any better, Vorian Atreides. But I really love, how, the Machine Crusade, I think, is my favorite of the book series, because, the way Xavier Harkonnen went down was just, oh my God.
No spoilers. Yes, no spoilers.
Oh, I always do spoilers. This is a spoiler zone, so.
All right.
Yeah, but, the way he went out, he went out there knowing that he was putting his reputation at stake, because no one was ever going to really find out the truth except for Vorian Atreides. But if people here are wondering what's happening, you definitely got to check out the series, because it's definitely worth it. I mean, I love how it reflects how, yes, the machines, we consider them evil, but yet the machines themselves consider themselves logical. They don't look at things as for example, throughout the battles, right? whenever you would see the machines could never understand except for Erasmus. Erasmus was a self-learning, independent thinking machine that studied human nature, right? And what people need to think about when it comes to Erasmus is like machines will never understand why humans will send an entire fleet to destroy like one planet. It doesn't make any sense to them. It's not logical. Why throw away so many different resources? And I think that's so important that you capture that, because machines and like thinking machines and stuff like that. Because the thing is, like, the thinking machines aren't the first artificial intelligence to think like that. I mean, there's so many different science fiction stories that reflect that as well, which is such an important thing to kind of capture into there. And I think that's one of the things I do love about the series as well.
Well, and I think that those were just big epic stories, and because it was set 10,000 years before Dune, we weren't really constrained by little tiny details as far as, well, this person has to be on this planet in this year because it's 10,000 years ago, and, you know, we don't know what was going on Earth 10,000 years ago. That was like way before the Egyptian Empire and everything. So all of the historical records are not necessarily going to be spot on accurate. In fact, you watch two different news networks today, and you will get the same story of what's happening today, right now. So I think that there's so much room to be telling great epic stories with, and that's what we like to do. Is we like to have terrific heroes, we like to have terrific villains, we like to have colorful landscapes, because to me, that's the core of Dune, was his world building and how much he made that one desert planet. Every aspect of it was real. And it's like he knew down to the sand plankton that make the oxygen that sustain the atmosphere on this desert planet that doesn't otherwise have much of an ecosystem. And Dune just made me think of so many things that when we're expanding the universe of Dune and telling all these different stories from different time periods, we want people to recapture that and remember what they got out of reading the first Dune book, so that they can be inspired and see so many different parts of the galaxy by just reading this one series.
I do gotta say, I do love like how in the books, yours and Brian's, the books that like really talked about where folding space really came from. And for those that are not aware about the whole folding space, essentially it is traveling without moving. If you don't know what I'm talking about, either read the book or watch the series or the 1984 movie. Essentially what it means is just like going from one section of the universe to the other in a blink of an eye, right? Because in the books with Mr. Anderson and Mr. Herbert that put together was that it would take months to go from one part of the galaxy or to the universe to the next. I mean, this is traveling at maximum speed.
Even at multiple times the speed of light, but folding space is vastly swifter than that.
Absolutely, and it's also much riskier too, and hence the beginning of the Guild of Navigators right there started, and it was originally constructed by which I haven't gotten to Navigators of Dune just yet, but like learning about Norma Zenfa and how she was able to be the first navigator, the first one to actually fold space successfully without any real risks right there. I mean, people were folding space all over the place, as in the Battle of Corrin, when Brian Atreides was taking his entire fleet and just nuking planet after planet after planet just to get rid of all the thinking machines right there and all the different omnious cores and whatnot, right? But the thing is that, like, I love, like, how it says there was risk involved, but this is how we got to this point. This is how we got to folding space. And I love that because, like, I never knew what the origins of that was. And I think it's so important to really explain that because, like, the thing is with folding space, it's just the thought and concept of it is just mind-boggling. I mean, faster than light travel for us even is just like, okay, how are we going to get to that point? But, like, going from one side of the universe to the next in the blink of an eye is just how. But I love how you explain that in the books.
Well, but any human endeavor that's involved exploring things or going where no one has gone before. That pushing the boundaries has always involved risk, whether it was test pilots that broke the sound barrier, or the first humans in space, and some of the astronaut casualties we've had, and many of the cosmonauts that the Soviets had, and the first sailing ship explorers. We know about Christopher Columbus showing up in the West Indies, but we don't hear stories about the hundreds of other ships that went off looking and then they sank, and so that nobody survived. I mean, I have no idea what the numbers of those were, but that for all of the discoveries that were made, there were lots of shipwrecks at the bottom of the sea because it was just so dangerous to go there. But if you don't do that, then you're not fulfilling like the human spirit, the initiative of trying to discover new things and go new places. And oftentimes it is desperation and maybe wartime that forces us to take that risk and to push the boundaries. And I've done, for another novel that I wrote, plus I worked for the Department of Energy for a long time, I've done a lot of studying of the history of the atomic bomb and the development in the Manhattan Project. And they were so desperate that they had to stop Hitler's spread and the spread of the Axis powers that they were willing to do this nuclear weapon. And when they tested the very first nuclear bomb out at the Trinity test site in New Mexico, when they detonated that first bomb, one of the scientists on the Manhattan Project had done calculations and said that there was a very real chance that detonating that one atomic bomb could well ignite the Earth's atmosphere and wipe out every speck of life on Earth. And yet they still tested it because they wanted to stop the Germans. Well, I'm not sure that would pass safety tests anymore. It turned out it worked for us because it ended up stopping the war, and and then it started other things. But when I look back and I studied that, when I realized that they went ahead with that test anyway, even though the calculations showed that it could ignite the Earth's atmosphere, it just makes your jaw drop. But that's what humans do. We take risks. We don't usually take a risk that's going to wipe out the entire human race. We hope.
Of course. And, one of the things I thought that was, one of the things I'd always wonder was, where did this divide come from between the Harkonnens and the Atreides? And it all made sense because, like I said, I when it came to the prequels, I started with House Atreides, House Harkonnen, and House Corrino. And I was like, but before I went to House Corrino, I went to the Butlerian Jihad, the Machine Crusade, and the Battle of Corrin. And I was wondering, where does this divide come in, right? Because, like, in House Atreides and House Harkonnen, you learn about, like, the Abelard Harkonnen, the one that was a coward. It was like, well, I got to hear this. And I didn't find out until the Battle of Corrin what happened exactly. And I just thought that was absolutely brilliant, like how you guys played that out. It's just like, and for those that aren't aware, okay, so in the Battle of Corrin, it's the final battle where the humans realize that this is the last planet of the thinking machines. And they've been, like, trying to find a way to break through it and get inside and just take care of the machines, right? And, like, the thing is the machines had hostages, human hostages. And they said, if you proceed any further, we're going to kill these hostages. And Brian Atreides, realizing
not just a few of them, there was like a planet's worth of population there that was at risk.
That's right. There was like millions of them, right? And anyway, there was this barrier that if the humans crossed over, they would detonate these ships. And some humans are like, well, why would we sacrifice this many people just for victory? That doesn't make sense. And then the thinking machines knew this. And Abelard Harkonnen was the one that protested the most, and he actually sabotaged, and the mission was almost a failure because he sabotaged it. But because Erasmus had that one moment of humanity, which I think is, it's crazy. Like, you would think a robot doesn't have humanity, but then you got to remember, like the Orville again, Isaac had that one moment of humanity. So Erasmus had that moment of humanity, and then he basically turned off that ignition sequence that would have destroyed all those ships. And then Abelard is looked at as a traitor, of course, and that just makes perfect sense of where the divide comes in. And it's just like, how do you create such a divide? Because the Harkonnens and the Atreides were best friends and were allies, but then you just read about how the Atreides, like, because originally, like, what was it? when the Butlers then became the Corrinos, they said that they were going to kill the Harkonnen. They were going to kill Abelard. But it's like, nope, shame the Harkonnen name. And that just, it makes perfect sense. Like, the hatred is just seething right there. It all makes perfect sense, though.
And they blame the Atreides for that. So it's just a stain on their honor for the longest time. And that whole setup at the end of the Battle of Corrin was one of those where, well, you've seen it. And Ender's Game did that in the novels and in Star Trek, the Kobayashi Maru thing at the Wrath of Khan. I love putting characters in what is genuinely a no-win scenario, and they have to choose one answer and live with the consequences, because it's not going to be, I'm sure everybody knows what the Kobayashi Maru is, it's not going to be like Captain Kirk tricks it. He says, there's a no-win scenario, but I'm going to reprogram it so that I can win. Well, no, in real life, you really are going to have to choose between one thing or another. And there was a Dean Koontz, who, as you mentioned, I wrote a novel with him in his first Frankenstein series. Dean Koontz has a book, and I'm blanking on the title of it right now. Intensity? No, I'm not sure that's what it was. But he's got this setup, which is, it's something like this random everyday person gets a letter from this crazy serial killer who says, if you call the police, I'm going to kill this school teacher with 3 kids. But if you don't call the police, I'm going to kill this medical researcher who's got a family and a foundation and I don't know, like 10 other orphans that he's watching. So she's given a choice where neither one of them is at all acceptable. And then the book is about how she tries to navigate that. And for the Atreides and Harkonnen feud, we really wanted to put them on opposite sides of what was truly a no-win situation. And Brian and I kind of got worked up ourselves writing it, because it's a pretty powerful situation that we put in there at the end of the Battle of Corrin.
Well, absolutely. But the thing is like, it really kind of makes you wonder how much of your humanity you're willing to sacrifice just for the sake of victory right there. And even though you're supporting Abelard, but the thing is, you got to think about it. What's more important? And it's just like, it's that question of humanity right there. And the thing is, like, the thinking machines are like, these humans are really going to sacrifice it. But they're like, it's something that they just cannot, process. I mean, the only other ones that you can think of that would actually think of that would be like the Titans. But even then, they were like, no, that doesn't make any sense right there. But it's so important to think about, because like, humans think outside the box. Machines anticipate everything outside the box. But it's just like, they just, if it doesn't make sense to them, they're not going to do it. But humans will go to great lengths. And I think when Erasmus was talking about, like, religious fanatics and how religion is like one of the most powerful motivators right there, it kind of takes me back to the 2000 miniseries where, what was it? The Padishah Emperor, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Yes,
Shaddam. He asked the Baron Harkonnen, have you ever faced a religious extremist before, a religious fanatic before? And it really just kind of goes back to, it's kind of like, they're honoring what Erasmus had said, it was like, a religious fanatic will go to great lengths. And who are the religious fanatics? The cult of Serena. They were going to all kinds of lengths, destroying every kind of technology they could come across.
Well, we see that in modern day stuff. If you look at ISIS and other religious fanatics and the violence that they're willing to do because they believe in their beliefs so much. And that was in the Butlerian Jihad, is basically humans, there's no way they can win. The machines outnumber them, they outgun them, they can outlast them, they can survive in terrible environments. There is just no way that the humans can win. And so the only way to get the humans to fight and sacrifice enough to defeat them is by playing upon their passion, their fanaticism. We had one quote in one of the books, which is like this Iblis Ginjo, the religious leader, even though like thousands and millions have been sacrificed, he says there are no defeats. There are only victories and moral victories. And I just love that's the way you frame it, that nobody loses. You either die for the right cause or you win. And that just is what made the humans win eventually in the Butlerian Jihad, because we were willing to do crazy crap that the robots didn't understand, and that's kind of the only way we pulled it off.
Absolutely, and it's just
not that I espouse religious fanaticism.
Oh, well, of course
that is
not.
what worked.
No, but we're talking about a war against something that is cold. It's unfeeling. It is relentless. Its only goal is to defeat its enemy, but it's not going to willingly sacrifice a lot of resources and a lot of its own troops, for the sake of victory. It's going to be more cold and calculating in that regard. But mankind, on the other hand, is feeling and is very, relentless in the same way, and will throw everything it has at one target just for the sake of victory. And it's very, 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 it really kind of appeals to the sense of what humanity truly is. We will throw whatever we have against our enemy, essentially, and in the hopes of victory. I mean, there's even another series. It's actually a video game series called Mass Effect, where it talks about its war against Reapers. We throw every bit of, our human or other alien life forms, all life forms, against this unbeatable opponent just for the sake of victory, even though we're facing like odds that we just cannot even fathom. Because like when you listen to the thinking machines and like how incredibly advanced they are, and like their weaponry is more superior, their numbers are more superior, they are thinking at making split-second decisions faster than we ever could. How can you defeat an enemy like that? Which I think is just, it's kind of frightening if you think about it, though. But that's just kind of the beauty. It really touches on humanity, these books right here.
Oh, I'm glad that it inspired you so much, because we were really trying to come up with something that was as ambitious and meaningful so that it fit in the Dune universe. And like we said earlier, Frank Hebert set up enough, he set the bar so high by writing, I think, the best science fiction novel ever, that we couldn't just phone something in. We had to do like our very best work, the most complicated plotting, the most meaningful themes, and the best characters and world building and stuff. So obviously you liked it. I'm glad to hear that, and I hope some of the listeners will go out and check some of the Dune prequels.
I do got to say, though, like when it comes, like before we wrap this thing up, the one thing I actually would like to say is like, as far as like the Atreides, like I do think that I liked learning more about Duke Leto, and like when how he took the throne essentially at such a young age, but yet because his father like really taught him well about what it means to be a leader. Mostly I'd have to say like that bold move he took when they were actually I think they were on their way to Kaitain, I think it was, for a coronation ceremony, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And the Harkonnens tried to make it seem like they attacked the Blenny Tleilaxu. And
oh, right. They tried to start a war
between the two.
Another house.
And it was a bold move that he actually says, like, listen, I will testify on my behalf, essentially, just don't attack us, and I'll lower my shields kind of deal. Which it really kind of like played. You feel like you learn so much about Duke Leto Atreides, and then you learn about why he seems like a cold and careless person because of what happened to his first concubine and his first son, which I didn't know he even had a first son, actually. And that's why you learn so much about how he's, like in the first book, he seems like a very cold and just like a heartless person. No, it's not. He's just, he was kind of molded that way. He cares very deeply about Jessica and Paul, but it's just his history. He didn't exactly have a good upbringing, if you want to be perfectly honest.
Well, I mean, we're all shaped by the events that happen in our lives, and because Duke Leto is this great hero in multiple books, we had to put him through some pretty substantial things. There are times that I, as a author, feel guilty about what we do to our characters, but Leto is still, like I said earlier, one of my very favorite characters in the whole Dune universe, and being able to tell his backstory in House Atreides and House Harkonnen and House Corrino was just really a great honor. Brian and I really loved that, and by doing that, when we came out with the prequel trilogy, the sales of the original Dune books tripled, and then they've continued on this upward spiral, and of course all of the buzz of the movie and other things has brought them back onto the bestseller list. Even we're, I think, 55 years or more from the original publication of Dune, so it's a book that endures. And of course, we're just this year alone, this October. So wow, 1 month from now will be 25 years since Brian and I wrote our first House Atreides. So it's something that I've spent a good part of my life working on, and I have no regrets, and I love what we've done, and we're so glad that we've gotten so many readers to be picking up these books, and then carrying on from that to read the Frank Herbert books, and maybe the movies will inspire even more readers to come to Frank Herbert's classic, and it just kind of makes me feel very happy that I'm able to do this much for the book that meant so much to me when I was reading it.
Absolutely, because, honestly, like, at the end of the day, we are all fans. We are all fans, and, like you saw it at Dragon Con, like, I saw, like, the amount of people that turned out dressed up as Fremen, and I saw the giant sandworm out there, and I just the amount of people that actually turned, because Dragon Con has a huge following. Like, my wife and I, like I said, went to Dragon Con, and there was nothing but lines, usually. But I love seeing, like, and this is going to continue to inspire, and, like, this is going to draw a really huge fan base, honestly, because for those of us that know the story and have followed the storyline, have played the games, have read the books, have watched the miniseries over and over again. But when the new movie comes out, like, I think it's just going to, captivate audiences, honestly. But hopefully people continue to read, yours and Brian's books and Frank Herbert's books, because at the end of the day, like, I think, like, books are, like, the best part. They capture our imagination, because nothing is better than a book where you just sit down and the feel of it, and you just feel like you can just disappear and be a part of the experience, which I think is the one thing that you and Brian have definitely captivated. And that's why I'm just, so grateful that I actually had the opportunity to speak to the author of these books.
Well, I'm glad that you enjoyed them, and I hope that we've entertained people in this episode. And now you got to go work really hard to find somebody for episode 3. Talk to George Lucas or something. That'll be good.
Oh, good God! I don't even know what I would do if I had George Lucas. But anyway, before I actually let you go, is there anything else that you would like the audience to know, or is there anything that you should just to check out, or anything that they should know about the Dune series before we close this session?
Well, there's tons of things to talk about, obviously, and all kinds of other books, and Brian and I have written other books, but people who are reading the Dune series, you've talked about some of our other titles. They might want to check some of those out, and just keep reading, because that's what kept Dune alive long enough for them to be bringing it back for yet another version on the big screen. So I'm very happy with so many fans and so many readers, and I hope that people keep reading.
Fantastic. Well, I just wanted to know, once I close the stream, I'll just do a couple of quick notes for you after I cut the stream. But again, Mr. Anderson, I do thank you for your time, and I'm very, very thankful that you actually took the time for this interview right here, and just know that you're very, very much appreciated here.
I appreciate it too. Thanks for all your support.
All right, so hopefully everybody has enjoyed this show right here. Please continue to hit like and hit share, and please continue to get this out here, especially if you know some fans of Dune. Get this out here so that way they can actually hear from one of the co-authors themselves. All right, everybody, have a great evening.